Hi, I'm Mary Schaefer, founder of AP Now, where we cover all issues related to the accounts payable function. As you might imagine, fraud is pretty high up on our list of topics to cover a lot. Part of our mission is to share the latest information about fraud so that the business community can protect itself. And that's why I wanted to give this talk on developing a fraud protection strategy. Now, our goal here today is to have a high-level discussion, a talk about the overriding principles that every organization should be using to protect itself, not a down-in-the-weeds, roll-up-your-sleeves discussion that we do in many of our AP Now programs and our publications. We have a free fraud protection cheat sheet for you about some of the newest frauds because unfortunately, there continue to be new frauds, and we'll share instructions on how to get it towards the end of this talk. But now let's dive right in and let's get started talking about fraud. Probably don't need me to tell you this, but the fraud is getting worse. The crooks, they're not stupid. There still are a few stupid ones out there, but there are some pretty intelligent people out there focusing on the accounts payable function, the payment function, basically anything of value that you have. And they're finding new and innovative ways to get their hands on your money. That's the easiest way to put it. Many of these bad actors are operating in other countries, so it makes it difficult once they've gotten your money to get it back. And it also means that prosecution is quite difficult. When there is a fraud, there's the obvious financial damage. The company has lost some money, but there can be other consequences as well. The reputational damage can be quite severe. Nobody likes to admit that they were taken advantage of. This has been especially burdensome, if you will, with some of the data frauds, some of the credit card frauds. That doesn't do anything to enhance the reputation of the company that was hit. But in addition to that, that stuff we kind of know, there's also devastation on a personal level. Oftentimes, these frauds involve basically tricking an employee into doing something that they weren't supposed to do or they weren't authorized to do. And that person is devastated when the fraud unravels. And it turns out, for example, the company lost $2 million that they lost simply because the person was tricked. In a few examples, making this devastation even worse, the person in question was fired. They lost their jobs. Crooks know how to take advantage of companies when they're vulnerable. Now, you may think that vulnerable, by vulnerable, I mean that you're in a weak position of sorts, but that's not the only way. Crooks can figure out, for example, if you're in accounting or accounts payable, that at the end of the month and the beginning of the month, your staff is apt to be rushed and have a lot of work to do. So many times they'll try and take advantage at that point, and they'll try and push through one of these phony emails or something of that nature at the end of the month. Late Friday afternoon is another popular time, like for the rush CEO wise. So they'll continue to study your organization and organizations in general, and there's nothing that you can do to prevent them from doing this, and they'll figure out where's your weak spot. They'll study your company's website. They'll study information in the public domain about your organization. For example, they'll figure out that, your CFO is giving a talk on such and such day at such and such place, and then they might pick that time to send a phony rush wire transfer request from that individual because they know if the person who received it is going to try and verify it, they can't because the guy's on stage someplace giving a talk. Okay, so don't underestimate the criminals. Some of these guys, to be fair, to be honest about it, they know more about the banking system and the loopholes than we do because they're continually studying it, continually looking for new ways to find ways to defraud you. Okay, so this means we have to constantly keep our guard up. What I like to say about these people is you can't stop somebody from targeting you, from trying to steal from you. But what you can do is you can have your fortresses in place and your protections in place so much that they're not successful and then they decide to take their business elsewhere. Now, if you're watching this live, and I hope you are watching this live, please add your comments, add your questions in the comments section because I'll be online watching this and responding as you do. So I hope we get a lot of comments. So I want to talk about strategy number one. And that is very simple. It's use best practices. By their very nature, best practices incorporate strong internal control. And if you use best practices, it will make it more difficult for the crooks to get through your fortress. But it's not enough to implement best practices, go through your work, do a review, and you have your best practices in place, and then you figure, okay, we're good. Unfortunately, maybe, maybe not, because the crooks are also continuing looking at your operation, and they may come up with new frauds, and this way we'll have to adjust. So we need to put our best practices in place, and then periodically and on a regular basis, review them and update them. This is especially important when new frauds come out. And we're going to talk a little bit more about when new frauds come out a little bit later on. So the crooks have kind of thrown the gauntlet down, if you will, and it is our mission to pick up that gauntlet and continually monitor our operations to make sure that we have the latest best practices in place. So let me give you a simple example. Today's best practice with regards to either a rush wire transfer request from a CEO or a CFO, or a change of bank account email request from a vendor. Today, our best practice says, don't automatically take that request at face value, verify it. And we had to change our best practices in this regard within the last few years because crooks figured out how to maneuver around that control. So while in the past, if you got a rush wire transfer request from the CFO, you did it rush. Today, you don't do it. You stop, you pick up the phone, you call the CFO, and did you send that? Was it from you? And hopefully it was. And so you go along your merry way. Another time that you might want to make sure that you review your controls and your best practices is when you implement new technology. Do not automatically assume that the strong internal controls and best practices are integrated into that technology. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but make sure that you make that part of the discussion. Part of the discussion about getting the new technology and implementing it needs to be around, hey, does it have the fraud protections that we need? Now, in the last year, you probably don't need me to remind you, we've had a lot of change. We've had a lot of change in our accounting operations. We've had a lot of change in our accounts payable operations and business in general with the move towards remote working. This means that we've had to change some of our best practices. So, for example, one of the things that I've been talking about for the last, few months, maybe 6 months, is how we should be moving to having all our invoices emailed and not have to rely on paper invoices coming through the mail, because getting those paper invoices turned out to be a problem during COVID. Now, you may be thinking, well, COVID, we're just about done, please God. But we don't know what the next crisis is. So we have to be prepared. And we can't just say, that we're done. So remote working, as we go through this within the next months, years, we have to make sure that as we implement that strategy, and I believe a lot of us are going to, either part-time or full-time, we have to make sure that we continue to use best practices. Okay, now, it's not just you and I who've come to recognize that COVID required a lot of changes. Criminals saw the opportunity also. Anytime there's change, anytime there's a disruption in our operations, that's an opportunity for crooks, unfortunately. And so we have to make sure, we keep our fortress tight. Another example of how things have changed is the IRS now has a recommendation for all anybody having to deal with personnel information, mainly payroll, but also accounts payable, but anything in general. And what the IRS says is any employee who gets a request from a high-level executive for any sort of personnel information should verify that before sending the information, because that's how we ended up with the W-2 fraud, because nobody thought, at least in the beginning, that, this request for W-2 information was from anybody but the CEO. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay. Strategy number 2, which I've kind of already alluded to, but let's talk about it a little bit, is having internal controls across the board. And this means no exceptions. And when I say no exceptions, I mean none. Not even for Joe, the guy who's been with you, the controller who's been with you for 30 years, doesn't take vacation, is honorable. He always has the company's best interest at heart. Or the company's AP manager, Jim, he's been there for 25 years, same thing. No exceptions. Because at the end of the day, the fraud research over and over again shows that most frauds are committed by long-term trusted employees. Now, most long-term trusted employees are exactly that. They have the company's best interests at heart, and they would never even dream of defrauding the company. But it's that one bad apple who surprises everybody, who you let your guard down, you don't have the controls around them, maybe give them access to everything or something of that nature, and then they're the person who defrauds you. And if you look at any of the stories on either fraud or embezzlement, you'll see that over and over again, these crimes are committed by long-term trusted employees when they don't have the proper controls in place. It's a really simple thing to do, but you need to make sure that controls around everybody regardless. Now, this is a delicate issue, okay? Nobody likes to think that, oh, we have somebody who would steal from us. But most companies may have one person, one or two. The problem is you can't figure out who they are. Now, I want to talk about vacations, assuming we can ever, get out of the house. But vacations should be mandatory. Everyone should take at least 5 consecutive days off if they have anything to do, even remotely, with your money. This means your entire accounts payable staff, your entire treasury staff, and anyone else who has anything to do with your money. Okay, and the idea here is they take 5 consecutive days off, and during that time, somebody else does their job. They don't do their job from home. Somebody else does it. And the feeling is that within the 5 days, if there's an ongoing fraud, it will unravel. Now, 10 would be better, but if you're only giving people 10 days to 2 weeks vacation, it's kind of hard to ask them to take it all at one time. Plus, some of us have rather small staffs, so that could cause problems also. Let's talk about our ERP access. A lot of people don't think about it, but whenever someone is promoted or leaves the company, same difference, their ERP access for their old job should be cut off. Now, it doesn't matter whether someone's leaving because they got a great new job and they were everybody's favorite employee and they loved the company. You don't know what's going on in the back of their mind. You don't know how they really felt. So just cut it off. And this way, everybody's ERP access is limited to what they have for their current job. They don't need all this other access. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about these issues, we have 2 what we call sound bites. They're on this YouTube channel. You can listen to soundbite number 2, which is on separation of duties. And in that one, we go through, down in the weeds, if you will, in the accounts payable function, we go through every responsibility and who should not have responsibility for something else because of separation of duties issues. We also have one soundbite number 5 on why you need to be a control freak about data entry. It's part of your controls. And we also have something on receiving invoices. That's soundbite number 9. So 2, 5, and 9, if you're interested in a little bit more detail on these internal controls as they relate to your accounts payable function. Okay. Strategy number 3, this is a simple one, and there's no reason not to do it. I like to say information is the silver bullet. If we can keep everybody current on what the newest frauds are, we've gone a long way to stopping that fraud in its tracks, if you will. I want to give you a simple example. There's been a gift card fraud that has been going around for a while, and all you have to do, if your employees knew about it, and then they got an email, related to gift cards, a light would go off and they'd say, there's a fraud. Wait a second. There's a fraud going on with the gift cards. And maybe this email's a phony. Maybe it's not for real. And that all, just that simple little bit of information is enough to protect them, to make them think and take that second look. Now, we're planning to have a podcast on that, so check back on this channel, or hit that bell at the top to be notified when we have new postings, or sign up for our free e-zine. It's on our website, www.ap-now.com. Go there in 5 seconds, a box pops up, and you can fill it out, and we'll notify you when we have new postings here. And we're going to do one on this gift card fraud, because people are getting hit by it. It's not a huge dollar amount, but again, just in the back of your mind, your employees should know, hey, there's something going on with gift cards. If I get an email about it, maybe I should just stop, take a closer look, and see what's going on. Now, when I talk about sharing information and sharing it, I mean with everyone. I like to say share it from the CEO, the person at the top, right down to the person who sweeps the floor. That might be a slight exaggeration, but not a huge one. And the reason for this is everyone within your organization is a potential target. Okay, crooks don't discriminate. They don't only go after managers. They don't only go after executives. If they can find an invoice processor who they can trick, they will. So make sure that when you share information about new frauds, you share it with everybody. And when you share it immediately. Okay, don't wait. Don't think, oh, well, we'll put it in the company newsletter at the end of the month, because by the time the end of the month comes, 4 of your employees may have been hit. Let me give you an example of how fast this stuff can spread. A few years ago, we had what's called the W-2 fraud. And by the way, all of you who had to put out those 1099 NECs this year, and you had to get them out by January 31st, you can thank this fraud for that. And the way this fraud went is somebody usually in payroll, but sometimes in HR, sometimes in AP, got an email that looked like it came from the CEO, and it said, please send me the W-2 file. Now, if the person who got that just stopped for a minute and said, what does our CEO want with the W-2 file? He can't get far enough away from that stuff most of the time. It would have stopped it, but a lot of people fell. So I got a call anyway. I'm getting off track. I got a call at like 5 o'clock on one afternoon, and it was a fellow that I know, and he said, you're not going to believe what happened to you. He said, our payroll manager got this email asking for the W-2 file. He said, supposedly it was from the CEO. Luckily, she was too smart to fall for that. So he went on a little bit, and I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. Let me look into it tomorrow. And when I got up the next morning, I opened my email, and there was another email from another one of my colleagues. And she said, hey, did you see what happened to the Grand Ole Opry? And sure enough, I went to pull up the story about the Grand Ole Opry. It was the same fraud. And at that same time, a number of stories came up because a number of companies had gotten hit with this. And so once one of these crooks develops this fraud, first of all, they'll execute it in as many places as they can, and then their colleagues will copy them, trying to execute it as well. So the result of those frauds, you may say, well, what would they do with the W-2 information? This is what they did with it. They took it and they filed phony tax returns getting refunds, so that when people with the legitimate information went to file their tax return, there was a problem with the IRS, and you know how much fun that was to iron out. So that started maybe three or 4 years ago. And first we had to issue our 1099s. Then remember, they had to report to the IRS by January 31st. And now we have this new 1099 NEC form. That was the fallout, and it did not make things easier for people who worked in accounts payable, people who had to issue them. It made it a little easier for the IRS to prevent some of the frauds, but it didn't help our guys. So I got the next tip that I'm going to share with you from one of my readers. I wish I remembered who so I could give credit. But what she said, she wrote me a little note, and she said, anytime we hear of a new fraud, we immediately share that story with our entire staff. So she said, every time you have a new story in your e-zine, we share the e-zine with everyone who might be impacted. And as I said earlier, you can sign up for that e-zine by simply going to our website, ap-now.com, wait 5 seconds, and the sign-up form will appear. One other way for you to share information is this particular talk is being taped, and it will be on the YouTube channel with exactly the same link that you're using to listen to it. So if you either want to listen to it again, I don't know why, I think you got the information the first time around, but anyway, if you wanted to listen to it again, or you wanted to share it with your staffers, just share it with them, and hopefully, we can save one person from getting hit with one fraud. And by the way, in case you haven't guessed already, I love to hear from people. So if you hear of a new fraud, or God forbid you're targeted, hopefully you don't fall for it, you please send me an email at publisher@ap-now.com. I love to hear from people and also share that information with the community. I'm very sensitive about fraud information. So if you're sharing something that maybe did not make your organization look in the best light, or you just want anonymity, I never share the name of the organization that this happened to, unless it's in the popular press somewhere, which is why I was willing to mention the Grand Ole Opry. But I usually try and keep quiet. So when you find out the information, whether it's, my stuff, of course, I hope it's my stuff, but, an article, a link, share it with everybody, because information really is the silver bullet. Okay. Our next strategy, the new norm, is that we're going to regularly have to adjust our processes, because the crooks, unfortunately, are pretty smart, or some of them anyway, the ones who we're dealing with, and they'll study our organizations, and they'll study what's going on. They study the banking system, and they figure out where they can, wiggle, weave their way in. I like to say it is a game of cat and mouse. And so what we've seen over the last number of years is there are regularly new frauds. Now, I wish I could tell you what they were, but unfortunately, I guess I'm not as smart as these crooks, because I can't figure it out. I did mention earlier that we had a fraud cheat sheet about some of the newer frauds. And to get it, just email publisher@ap-now.com and put the word fraud cheat sheet in the subject line, and I'll send it to you. No obligation, nothing. We just want to share as much information with the public as we can, because even though fraud is fun to write about, and I have to admit it's a little bit more fun than internal controls, I'd be a much happier camper if there was less of it. Okay, so when you hear of a new fraud, yeah, we want to share the information, but let's take it one step further. You hear about a new fraud that's going on. The first question you should ask is, are we vulnerable? So for example, with requesting the W-2 file, hey, does our payroll person know this? Does HR know this? Is there anyone else? That's question number one. Are we vulnerable? And if we are, what, if any, changes do we need to make? And we need to make them now. We can't say, oh, we're busy, we're going through month end, for example, and we'll make the changes, when we do our quarterly update, because by the time you get around to your quarterly update, you could have been hit 2 or 3 times. So just take a moment to step back. Are we vulnerable? Where would we be vulnerable? What do we need to change? Maybe nothing, okay? Hopefully nothing, but maybe. And just, 5 minutes worth of thinking. And if it's an area where, like, maybe there's an HR component, you might ask somebody in HR to do the same type of thinking, because, we can't know everything. And when it comes to fraud protection, to quote an old African saying, it really takes a village. Okay. Now, when you have a fraud, okay, God forbid it happens, whether you have a fraud, by the way, or a duplicate payment, or any other mistake, to be fair, but fraud and duplicate payments are the big ones. What you want to do is you want to take a step back and say, okay, how did this happen? What did we do wrong? Then you figure it out, and then you say, well, can it happen again? maybe. What do we need to check to change? What change do we need to make? What process change? What do we need to tighten? What do we need to do to make sure that this doesn't happen to us again? And you'll figure it out. It depends upon what the particular issue is. Do you need to get dual controls? Do you need to verify? Do you need to just stop doing this? And one of the issues, although we're not going to really talk about it, is we like to tell people, be careful what you put on your website. Yeah, you have to have a lot of information about your company. I mean, we can't, live under the mattress, so to speak. But do you have information on there that you shouldn't have on there, or that you don't have to have on there but might help a crook? So an example of that is, we used to tell people, if you're trying to get your vendors to pay with ACH, put your ACH form on your website. And this way, when one of your vendors comes to your website, they'll see, the ACH form, they'll fill it out, and they'll send it to you. And, yeah, that makes sense. That's a good practice if you were just looking at that particular issue in a silo by itself, but you're not. Okay, we're looking into, we have to look at the big picture. And unfortunately, it's not only your vendors who would find that piece of information, that form, but crooks who are trying to get you to make an ACH payment to them instead of a legitimate vendor. So now we tell people, only put that form on your website if you have a password protected site, especially for your vendors. If you don't, then don't put it there. And I will tell you that I heard from a number of people who they had actually had crooks download the form and fill it out in such a manner to try and deceive them and get them to send money to them. It's not hard for a crook to make a very good guess at who you're doing business with. Sometimes just by the nature of your business. And then there are other companies that we all do business with, like the utilities. And crooks have been known, for example, to sit outside some of your locations, maybe sit outside your warehouse or your factory and see who's making deliveries, what trucks are coming in. So they can make a really good guess at it. So be careful about what you put on your website. Likewise, we tell people, be careful about what you put on your LinkedIn profile. Now, everyone has to have a LinkedIn profile in this day and age. Okay, it's not fair to say to employees, don't have a LinkedIn profile. But you don't have to put down on the LinkedIn profile, I'm the person who makes wire transfers. Okay, that's just putting, a bullet on your back, or a bullseye on your back, rather. Okay, so be smart about what information you share publicly. Yes, there's some information you must, but you don't need to announce to the public at large, yes, we're making ACH payments. Okay, you don't need to do that. So just be careful about it. Now, the last thing in this adjustment is, I strongly suggest to folks that they do an annual review of their processes in accounts payable, probably treasury also, about how they go through their operations. The main reason to do this is to make sure that you're using the latest best practices, to see if there are any ways that you can maybe become a little bit more efficient, or maybe there was some new technology or a new best practice that someone heard at a conference, for example. But while you're looking through your processes and trying to figure out what you need to change, you should also be looking to say, hey, did I hear of any new fraud? Do we have any weakness someplace? Is there anything that we should be changing to kind of tighten up, if you will, our operations? Okay, strategy number 5, if you will. I like to say leverage technology. Now, I want to start off by talking, I like to say about technology, it gives with one hand and it takes with the other. And, it really it does. So you want to figure out when technology doesn't work for you and how you can address it. So one of the big areas where technology really helps the crooks, helps the criminals, rather than helps us protect our operations, is email. And all the craziness that's gone on with email manipulation, manipulating email addresses, spoofing email addresses. So this is when technology hasn't worked so well for some of our companies, and we want to figure out how we can improve that. Now, probably all of you have heard the piece of advice is, you have your URL, whatever it is, whatever for your company name. And let's say company name was, ABC Incorporated. You probably also want to get any URLs that are close to your company name. So if your URL was abcincorporated.com, which I'm sure it wasn't, but you might also want to get abcinc.com. Any common misspellings. So that goes a long way to eliminating that avenue, if you will, for crooks. They're still going to play around with the email addresses. You've just removed the easy ones from them. Likewise, when you're talking about URLs and you don't want them to manipulate, if you have ABC company.com, you probably want to get .biz and all these other crazy ones that they're now coming out with, because it's real easy to miss that. When we're talking about email manipulation, and sometimes I give examples in some of my fraud talks, and as part of the questions, everybody guesses which is the right one. It's really easy to get it wrong, and people get it wrong even when they know we're talking about manipulated email addresses and what's right and what's wrong. So anyway, you want to do that. Figure out where technology doesn't work for you, in this case, the crazy email addresses and or the similar URLs, and then what can you do to adjust it. Now, the next thing is you want to use analytics to review your payment data and a lot of your AP, treasury, accounting functions to see, even if it's after the fact, but ideally before the fact, you can identify potentially fraudulent situations. We have episode 77 on this channel of the AP Now podcast, for example, is using Excel to find duplicates in the master vendor file. Eliminating duplicates in the master vendor file is one of many steps you can take towards tightening your controls and not allowing fraud. So you want to use your analytics and whatever other review techniques you can to identify the fraud, ideally before the money goes out the door. But afterwards is fine too. Not as good, obviously. And then once you've reviewed it, you can fix what you have to fix or try and get the money back if you can. Also, I know many companies don't do it. We recommend using after the fact payment audits. You can do a lot of that yourself. Some of it will just be recovering duplicate payments, but whatever, it's money coming back to you. Everybody should be doing audits. And then bringing in a third-party firm. The nice thing that I like about third-party firms is, yes, you have to pay them. Usually, ideally, they work on a contingency basis, but you do get that money back. You have a different set of eyes looking at your operations, seeing where you went wrong. They should be giving you a management report. When they give you that management report, take it, look at it, and make the changes that they recommend, assuming that they're reasonable. I can't tell you the number of auditors that I talk to that they say, every few years we go back to the same company and we find the money in the same places. They don't fix things, so fix it. It's one thing if you're making duplicate payments, but the same weaknesses that allow those duplicate payments to get through your process will also allow a fraud potentially to sneak through. Okay, so as much analytics as you can use, as much audit tools as you can use, you want to go and do it. Now, the last point I want to make is remember that many frauds start with an honest mistake. So just one more reason to use best practices and to do these after the fact audits, because the honest mistake happens. You paid somebody twice, for example, and a light goes off and they say, oh, these people, they don't know what they're doing. Let me go ahead and continue this activity. And then it is a fraud, although sometimes it's hard to point out. So look for duplicate payments, even when they're after the fact, and then nip those issues in the bud. Okay, so I wish you the best of luck. Don't forget to request that fraud protection cheat sheet. And if you like this talk, please remember, we always appreciate those thumbs up, those subscribes, those shares. Thank you for listening.